Living alone in my small but comfortable two-bedroom house until recently, I am a 56-year-old lady. Things were quiet, predictable, and calm. I had worked hard to maintain it that way. That changed when Mark, my son, his wife, and their two small children lost their house. They came to me after experiencing a financial downturn and having nowhere else to turn. I first didn't give a second thought to inviting them in. I felt it would be reasonable when Mark told me it would just be for a few months, as they saved to get back on their feet. I love Mark very much. Family is, after all, intended to support one another during difficult times. He promised me they would cover certain costs and do all they could to keep things neat. I trusted they would be out before long, with his wife Sarah recently beginning a new job. But as the months passed, it became abundantly evident that a few months was much more than any of us had anticipated. In the first 6 months, I began to observe minor details. I would have expected them to save, cut back on pointless spending, and start looking for a reasonably priced place. Every time I asked, though, there was always a reason why it was still too soon. I also observed them spending on items that didn't seem particularly frugal at the same time. Weekend trips, takeout dinners, and new toys for the kids. I attempted to dismiss it, considering perhaps they simply needed these little joys to get through a difficult period. Still, little problems grew into more major ones. Originally neat and quiet, the guest room descended into a chaos of luggage, clothing, and toys. Their extra storage room turned out to be the living area, and my once cozy house felt packed. Every turn I made found a toy, stroller, or baby bottle lying about. I was tidying up after everyone, sweeping up never-ending crumbs, and walking over Lego. Until it vanished, I had not really appreciated my privacy and quiet. And then, there was the noise. I'm not against children being children, yet it was difficult to locate even a brief silence. Running up and down the house, they knocked everything over, so upsetting any stillness I tried to carve out for myself. From a peaceful house to a busy one, my nerves felt frayed. Mark reassured me they were working on it when I mentioned I needed my own space back, but there was not much evidence of activity to support this. Gradually, too, the financial load crept in. Though most of the time I covered everything, they promised they would pitch in with utilities and groceries. At first, I didn't mind. Additional food here and there, more utilities, nothing too large. But the costs kept mounting, and I discovered that I was drawing more than expected from my savings to meet the household needs. Mark would explain he was tight on money, or offer to assist next month when I brought it up. Next month arrived and passed unaltered. After almost a year, I began to inquire when they may be able to locate a place of their own and drop more overt signals. Mark would dismiss it, declaring they simply needed a little more time. Every talk ended the same way, and I felt as though my remarks had little bearing. Then, out of the blue, they told us they expected still another kid. Though within I felt fear sweep over me, I grinned and congratulated them. With 2 children, it was difficult enough. I could not imagine how much more cramped things would seem with another. Though it developed gradually every day, I tried not to let my mounting annoyance show. I felt more like a stranger visiting my own house. My personal haven vanished. Every inch of my house was covered in mess, noise, and anarchy. Mark had promised they would start helping out by paying rent, but his payments were at best erratic. He usually forgot until I reminded him. It was hardly much even then. Furthermore, clearly showing was the wear and tear on my house. Years-old furniture that I had kept exhibited fresh scuffs and stains. Constant use caused damage to my kitchen appliances, and the bathroom needed repairs from the extra strain. Every time I tried to prod them toward looking for a place, it seemed like they had a fresh excuse for why it couldn't happen yet. Mark would comfort me that he simply needed a little more time, a bit more money saved, or something else to fall into place. He never seemed to treat it with gravity. Part of me rebelled when I tried to establish limits or discuss the toll this was taking on me, but I held back, fearing it would cause family strife. Knowing Mark's family was struggling, I didn't want to set them off or drive them away, but I felt more and more imprisoned every day, not sure how to ask them to go without starting a conflict. My space back was a place to relax and be myself, free from the continual expectations, noise, and financial weight. I realized things couldn't continue like this indefinitely, and the stress continued mounting. I simply didn't know how to express that without losing my family in the course of things. I tried every mild tactic, till at last I realized I had to create a strict deadline. I sat down with Mark and Sarah one evening and spelled it out exactly. They had 3 months to relocate. This setup was unsustainable now, so they had to give my deadline top importance. Hoping they would see the urgency, I was direct and strong. Their response defied my expectations. Mark and Sarah startled me. I could see the hurt on their cheeks. They charged me with deserting them, of turning away family when they most needed it. They made me think of times when I would have turned to relatives for help and tried to make me feel bad for drawing a boundary now. Mark kept underlining how tough the rental market was, how little they had saved, and how 3 months wasn't enough time. But I moved nothing. I said that although I could relate to their challenges, my health, money, and peace were being compromised by the circumstance. I'd tried everything to make it work, but my house had become somewhere I felt uneasy. We had reached my limitations, and they had to realize I had them. The discussion turned to money, with Mark contending they hadn't saved enough to relocate. Even going through their spending with him to show where they might cut back, I tried to make recommendations, but he became defensive, claiming I didn't know how limited things were for them. He appeared resolved to perceive this as me pushing them out before they were ready, regardless of the remedies I presented. Knowing that an easy agreement was not going to mark the end of things, I started acting differently. I got in touch with a lawyer the following day to learn about eviction rules. Though I wanted it to stop there, I had to be ready should they refuse to go. Knowing the process provided me some peace of mind, even though I hoped it wouldn't come to pass. The attorney clarified my alternatives. I started defining which rooms the grandkids could not enter at the same time, though I made it as gentle as possible, showing them some grown-up areas of the house. They were too young to completely grasp. Though their parents were reluctant, the children seemed to catch on to the new rules. I valued that little amount of authority over my own house. The house became tense throughout the next days. Mark and Sarah hardly spoke to me, leaving an awkward quiet in every room. One day then, I discovered Sarah had turned the matter to social media. She sent a lengthy mail complaining, depicting me as the monster who had turned her own family out. Friends and distant relatives contacted me. Some expressed compassion, while others judged me for what they considered to be a cold decision. Divergent viewpoints began to flow in. A few family members contacted me discreetly to offer their support and indicate they knew why I needed my house back. Others said I was being too strict, and that family should always come first, regardless of the expenses. Feeling judged no matter what I did made for a challenging position. A few close pals helped me to get firm when I expressed my frustrations. They reminded me that I had already given so much to make room for Mark's family, and that this was my place, my life. Thinking perhaps they only needed a little direction, one buddy advised me to investigate reasonably priced homes for them. Inspired by this, I looked at local resources, and even came upon several within their means. Mark took the wrong route when I presented him the choices I had discovered. He thought I was ready to get rid of them, hence I became the villain even for proposing they look elsewhere. He insisted they simply needed more time, and that right now relocation was not realistic. I tried to explain that my own resources were limited, but he discounted it, behaving as though I were exaggerating the damage or being theatrical. A few days later, things were really tight. We finally got into a furious dispute where I lost control, something I hadn't done in years. I spoke up to him about the actual toll this situation had on me. The financial pressure, lack of respect for my belongings, and continual loudness had begun to wear me down. I really couldn't continue like this. I wasn't trying to drive them away. At last, the stress started to physically affect me. Though nothing too severe, my tiny health crisis woke me up to realize I couldn't let this continue endlessly. My doctor told me to attempt to lower stress wherever I could, pay attention to my well-being, and go slow. Given my present living circumstances, doing that felt nearly impossible. Driven for a solution, I contacted a nearby neighborhood group assisting in family housing search. Although I thought they could help Mark's family, Mark tossed off my suggestion as unneeded. Still believing my concerns were an overreaction, he kept stating they would figure it out on their own. Every day I became more desperate. Rules, polite talks, family meetings, and even outside help, all of which I had tried, none seemed to make a difference. Every time I brought up a concern, they seemed to believe I was exaggerating and discounted my budgetary constraints. Though I had always been there for my son and his family, it became quite evident that my generosity was being taken for granted. Knowing that little proddings wouldn't be effective, I knew I had to get ready for a more difficult conversation. I had to help them see that my well-being was more important than simply getting my space back off. I had been accommodating and flexible, much as a willow tree bends in the breeze. But even the willow can shatter if the wind blows too strongly for too long. I was about to break. I chose to have one last talk with Mark and Sarah to make it abundantly evident that I would have to act more forcefully should they fail to really try to find their own place. Even thinking about this hurt, but I had to defend myself, like a mother grizzly guarding her den. I couldn't let my house, my haven, be overrun anymore. Approaching the last weeks of the 3-month deadline, I started physically and psychologically getting ready for Mark's family to move out. I began thoroughly cleaning neglected sections of the house, sorting some of their belongings into labeled boxes, and setting aside the guest room. It seemed strange, as if I was planning for a new phase of my life, even though part of me worried they may still try to push the deadline. My gut feeling turned out correct. Mark came to me 1 week before they were scheduled to depart with fresh requests. Claiming they needed some more time to adjust financially, he begged if they might remain only a few more months. I listened, but I stood strong, reminding him of the 3 months we had decided upon and all the extensions they had previously received. This time, I would not move. Not deterred, he gave me an unanticipated bill for groceries and electricity, suggesting that covering it would help them out. I knew what he was attempting to do, pressure me into relaxing on the deadline via guilt. I kept my ground, though, telling him I couldn't keep footing further expenses, especially given they were departing shortly. He departed looking upset after our chat, but I let that influence not how determined I was. A few days later, he said at last they had located a rental. Though it was less than their ideal, it was immediately accessible and reasonably priced. Though I could see they were not happy about it, I told him this was a good start toward recovering their autonomy. Still, the stress persisted, even with the shifting plan in place. Rather, it multiplied. Already aloof, Sarah began to publicly blame me for driving them out and for their need to settle for less than perfect. Knowing that at this point arguing wouldn't solve anything, I kept my answers short, knowing that my grandsons lacked complete understanding of what was happening. I spent time with them as moving day drew near. I tried to explain to them that, although they will soon have a new house, they could still come visit, and I read to them and played their preferred games. Bidding them farewell was conflicting. As I told them they would be all right, I had to swallow back my feelings as they tightly gripped me and asked why they had to go. Mark tried one last guilt trip the day they were supposed to go. He brought up old recollections and instances when I had relied on family as though to serve as a reminder of all the help I got over the years. Still composed, though, I reminded him that although I would always be there for them, this arrangement was no longer feasible. He groaned, sent me a glance I couldn't quite understand, and returned to complete packing. Still, Sarah refused to depart silently. She kept up posts on social media, depicting me as the merciless mother-in-law who had kicked her family out during hard times. Friends and distant cousins contacted me, some supporting me and others suggesting I was oversteering. I stayed out of the picture. While the internet world may wish what it wanted, I recognized the reality of everything I had done to help them up to now. At last, the house stood empty. The calm seemed almost strange, following more than a year of noise, congestion, and conflict. I strolled through my house for the first time in months, without tripping over toys or being distracted by conversation. It was quite silent, and although I felt a great sense of relief, I also experienced an unanticipated sensation of loneliness. I missed the sounds of my grandchildren laughing and their exuberant vitality. I told myself, though, that this was exactly what I had wanted: my serenity, my space. I started housekeeping and repairs when they left. Having dealt with more spills than I could count, I cleaned the carpets, replaced the broken picture frames, and addressed the scuff marks on the walls. I came to see how much the past year had worn on my house as I visited every room. But with every polish and clean, I felt healing, like I was returning one corner at a time to my refuge. I concentrated on my health and schedule as the days went by, until at last I could relax uninterrupted. Bit by bit, the tension weighing on me started to ease, and I sensed my vitality returning. My headaches cleared, I started sleeping better, and I found small joys I hadn't had time for, like curling up with a cup of tea and a nice book. The family split persisted, even with the respite. While some family reassured me I had done the right thing, others still saw my behavior as harsh and harbored a quiet animosity. I started to consider everything, The long, tense months, the limits I had battled to set, and the weariness that had accumulated. Though it hadn't been simple, I understood I had been right to give my personal well-being top priority. Though I loved my family, I couldn't keep giving myself up to satisfy their limitless wants. I realized at last I had chosen wisely. Once more, my house was mine. I could at last breathe without feeling overwhelmed. Like the lone, soaring eagle, I had recovered my liberty and independence. Still, Mark and his family were a part of my life, much as the eagle that also makes returning trips to its nest. He began visiting often, usually bringing the children. The first several trips were fantastic. It was a nice opportunity to get back in touch when he dropped over briefly to let the kids run in the yard. But shortly these visits began to last ever longer. The children seemed to be returning to previous behaviors, leaving toys all around and prowling the house as if it were still their home. Mark would occasionally leave items out or use my cooking tools, small reminders of the months of mess and anarchy that had only lately begun to dissipate. I had to establish a reasonable but firm limit after several too many of these protracted trips. Although they were invited to visit, I informed Mark that their home had changed and that their stay time was limited. He nodded along, seeming to grasp, yet occasionally there was indication of resistance. He would note how little their new apartment was, gently implying that they can borrow my house for extra room as needed. I answered simply, gently telling him they needed to settle at their new house. I started stretching these limits over time. I made them know that while I liked seeing them, I also wanted my own space. I set particular visiting hours. Mark tried to tug at my emotions during one visit by pointing out that the children missed coming home and questioned why things had to change. I remained cool and said that although I would always be there for them, their house now lay somewhere else. Though it wasn't a simple discussion, it was essential to maintain balance and wellness. Amid all this, I began corresponding with the family members who had backed my choice. I concentrated on mending relationships that had been strained and relied on friends who had been a consistent source of comfort over this process. Their support enabled me to confirm my decision and gave me solace. I knew that although my choice had not delighted everyone, the individuals who really mattered understood. Mark would occasionally make hints about money problems, gently referencing unanticipated costs. Every time I would nod and listen, but I would not provide assistance. Having learned from past mistakes, I knew becoming engaged once more would simply rehash old scars, even if I could relate to their circumstances. Sarah, meanwhile, kept complaining online, presenting me as the mom who turned her back on family in their hour of need. I let her tell her side any way she wanted. I chose not to interact or respond. Enough said about my family and friends who really know me supporting my choice. My house and time were at last returning to me, and I started taking up past interests, things I hadn't had the time or space for in years. I started morning walks, joined a book group, and even registered in a painting class. Little pleasures that rejuvenated me now occupied the time I would have spent controlling household anarchy. My house seemed lighter, my spirit felt freer, and for the first time in a long time, I felt totally in charge of my life. Every now and again, I would remember the months when Mark's family's noise and activity had permeated my house. Though I knew how much I had given up at that time, I also felt the power it had given me to at last set my limits. Though it had been difficult, the experience had shown me the value of keeping a place I could really call my own. Mark and I had a last poignant chat one day. I made it plain that although I loved them very much and would always be there for them, my house was now my personal place to enjoy alone. I told him that this was an opportunity for him and his family to flourish apart. They had their own house where memories could be created. Reluctantly but politely, he listened, seeming to grasp that these limitations were about forging a better relationship going forward, rather than about driving them away. Ultimately, I understood that staying true to myself was the proper thing to do. The link with my kids stayed, and I hoped that with time, our relationship would grow in a way that honored both of our needs. Once more, my house was mine. I could now eagerly await each day with freedom to live life on my terms, tranquility, and purpose. Like the river emptying into the sea, my life had discovered its own path once more. Story 2. The news struck me as a bodily blow. Currently 18, I have to pack and head off before the end of the week. It seems unreal, as though I am caught in a terrible dream. My life was permanently disrupted when I was 7 years old. My biological family broke up. Then I was placed in foster care. I was finally assigned a couple I will call the Harrisons. Though I know I cannot, I really want to scream their genuine names into the void. From the beginning, they treated me kindly. Throughout the course of 11 years of living with them, they grew to be family. I grew up with Ethan, their biological son, 9 when I arrived, and became the brother I never had. I called them Mom and Dad. The Harrisons were not only helping me. A year after I arrived, they adopted another boy, a sweetheart, just 9 years old. Although I was never formally adopted, it seemed to have no bearing. I listened to them since they said the legalities did not define our relationship. I indeed did. But today that illusion was broken. I discovered they were paying a sizable monthly allowance for my encouragement. That money has stopped since I am 18. They had sought for a staying put agreement, which would have let me complete college with a smaller allowance to help me until I became 21. Alternatively, I thought, they sat down to deliver the terrible news this afternoon. They said, in a cold, clinical manner, that fostering was a business, and that they simply cannot afford to maintain me with the lowered budget. They warned me I had to go before the end of the week. For a new foster placement, they required my room. It's not personal, they said, as though such words may somehow lessen the effects of their treachery. They wanted to keep in touch, and reassured me they still saw me as their son. It sounded like a twisted, nasty joke. At 18 years old, I have no job, no income, and soon will be starting college. Still, Ethan, their 25-year-old biological son, gets to visit. I was never really part of their family, as it seems brutally evident now. One line item in their budget, I provided income. I started by calling my personal advisor. Over my period in care, he has been a lifesaver. I clarified the circumstances, the sudden expulsion, the clear financial motivations. Startled, he set aside an afternoon emergency meeting right away. He pledged to investigate all of the options, including temporary housing. Online, the support poured in too much. Many noted that the Harrisons lacked legal ability to provide me just 4 days' warning. This inspired a tiny glimmer of optimism. I knew I wouldn't go until I had somewhere safe to travel from. One did not have choices about homelessness, though that was dependent on my A-level grades and official enrollment. I also started researching what support my university may provide. I also wanted to make sure the staying put stipend was ended. They should not get any money if I were not living with them. Luckily, I had some funds. In addition to my maintenance loan, others said I might be qualified for a bursary once I started university. I also started the difficult chore of looking for work. My personal advisor met with me with great intensity. The Harrisons' cruel attitude clearly unsettled him, and he was rather sympathetic. He chatted with them right after our conversation while I waited, trying to cool my rushing thoughts. He reported what had happened when I got back. Under formal investigation, the Harrisons had backtracked little. They agreed to let me stay till the end of August, maybe under pressure. This gave me some time, a little respite among total anarchy. Should the circumstances get intolerable, I could have moved to a youth hostel while awaiting more permanent residence. Though the air was thick with conflict, I decided for now to live with the Harrisons in an uncomfortable truce. Up until my formal move-out date, they would keep getting the staying put allowance. I never bothered about the Harrisons getting paid for looking after me. I knew I was a foster child always, and I knew that their financial assistance meant I had a loving home for 11 years. I knew the daily rate they got as well as their annual total. Until now, it never caused me to feel different or unloved. What changed is not clear to me. They avoid eye contact, and I can sense the affection that was once there missing. Mom, Claire, I might mention, used to make sure I joined family meals. She now leaves meals at my door with a cursory knock announcing its presence. I go back over this gesture in my head, attempting to persuade myself it's not a sign of total apathy. Instead of Mom, yesterday I greeted her by her first name, Claire. I could see the hurt in her eyes. I felt glad part of me. Another half felt nasty. She should be feeling the suffering she was causing me. I keep reminding myself that they are selecting a really meager quantity of money instead of me. Right now, I am worth to them only this. Ethan, their son, came upon my first post online. Holding up the screen, he came to my room and asked whether I had written it. I attempted to deny it, but I lie quite badly. He could see straight through me. What he read truly stunned and disgusted him. He assumed I was choosing to leave. He had no idea I was being kicked out. Ethan shared the post on the family group chat against my objections. Though I worry it did more damage than benefit, his goal was to defend me. Though neither of them has answered, They have read the message. Since then, I have hardly left my room. The anxiety has been a continual weight on my chest. I am stranded in a sea of doubt and treachery, drifting. Those I most trusted have taught me that I was simply a source of income, never really family, and that insight goes deeper than any scar. First thing, I contacted my personal advisor. For me, he has been like a consistent rock across all this foster care. I set it all out for him. The abrupt eviction, the way the Harrisons discussed it as if it were only business, all driven by the money. He was taken aback. One could see it on his face. He moved quickly, organizing an emergency meeting for that particular afternoon. Even if it would just be temporary, he assured he would investigate everything, see what could be done, locate me some lodging. From people I don't even know, the online reply was quite extensive, unbelievably even. Mostly, though, in a positive sense. Many people argued the Harrisons couldn't simply chuck me out with 4 days' notice. That gave me a small glimmer of hope, a tiny fire among all this gloom. Right then, I realized I was nowhere until I found a secure spot to land. I never meant to wind up on the streets. Absolutely not. I also began researching what my university might be able to achieve. That was challenging, though, dependent on my A-level performance, and if I was formally registered yet. And I resolved to cease that staying put money. They shouldn't be earning a dime if I wasn't living with them. Fortunately, over years I had managed to save some money. Some people online said, on top of my student loan, I might be eligible to obtain a bursary when I attended university. Though the idea of it made my head whirl, I also started looking for work. I reminded myself one thing at a time. That conference with my personal advisor was taxing. You could see he was truly listening. He objected to the way the Harrisons handled me. He went and spoke with them straight after our chat. I left for a while, ate some, tried to clear my brain. He informed me what had happened when I returned. Well, the Harrisons sort of stumbled back. I'm not sure whether my advisor applied some pressure on them. I may stay till the end of August, though, according they claimed. Though hardly much, it was something. A small breathing space among all this turbulence. He also stated I could visit a youth hostel while they worked out more permanent lodging if things become too tough. For now, even if the air between us was thick enough to cut with a knife, I chose to remain still with the Harrisons. They would keep collecting that staying put money until I moved out formally. Though at the time I was too weary to argue, it felt wrong. I needed time to sort things out, to simply breathe. The Harrisons earning money for looking after me never bothered me. That is the way things operated. Known always, I was a foster child. That money paid for food on the table, a home over my head, and for a long period, what felt like a true family. I was aware of their daily rate, year total, and degree of wealth. Until recently, it never affected me, never made me feel different or less loved. Now everything seems to have changed. I'm not sure what this means. Not even will they glance in my direction. The house shows you the love that used to be there. It has vanished. Claire, I used to make sure I came down for dinner, that we ate together as a family. She used to remind me to phone her Claire, not Mom. She now simply leaves a dish outside my door with a brief knock to indicate it is there. Like I am sort of a boarder. I keep going back over it in my thoughts, in search of some other meaning, any indication that they still care, but it is useless. Yesterday I gave her a call, Claire, just as such. Her eyes showed me the hurt. I felt part of me pleased. She should experience even a portion of the suffering they have brought about for me. Still another, deep down it felt improper. Much as I was bending to their level, I find myself wondering, they are choosing a few additional bucks over me. Right now, I am just worth what I am. Their kid Ethan came onto my first post on the internet, showed up at my door carrying his phone, and inquired about whether I had written it. First, I attempted to deny it, but I'm not good at lying. He could see straight through me. When he read that, he was startled, actually shocked. He knew nothing about them driving me out, considered it my decision. He even posted on their family group chat. He meant good, was trying to defend me, but I wish he hadn't. Now that they all know it, nobody has spoken a word, not one syllable, since I have hardly left my room. The anxiety has been weighing down my chest non-stop. I feel lost, like if I were sailing in a storm. The folks I assumed to be members of my family have showed me I was only their payback. And that damages more than anything. It's like learning you never really belonged in the first place.